Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming for this meeting, all the participants, and also to thank the organizers of this very important meeting, where we are looking at social protection and jobs in fisheries. But our major focus is also to see how this connects with different sectors within the blue economy. Today we are joined by a number of panelists that are going to talk to us, giving their discussion points. And we are very blessed actually to have quite a number of very, very important presentations here that are also going to look at case studies in different countries. We all most likely understand a bit about the social protection and what it does. When disasters come to our fishers, when our fishers face closure of the fisheries, it is a very good tool for us when it comes to fisheries management. It touches on quite a number of issues, including biodiversity, management of the stocks for the future, and it's an important tool that we need to always be having, as we develop our fisheries. Today we are going to hear some opening remarks from our Global Director, Valerie Hickey, Global Director, Environment and Global Department, Environment Global Department at the World Bank. This is of our. And we're also going to be hearing opening remarks from a country representative that is from Kenya, Roderick Kundu, who is the Secretary of Fisheries and Blue Economy, the Department for Blue Economy and Fisheries, Minister of Mining, Blue Economy and Maritime Affairs in Kenya. We are going to maybe speak a few things about how we're going to handle this today. One rule is that please keep your microphone on mute at any given time, unless you are speaking. And also, we are encouraging that you type your messages in the chats so that you can have some answers directly done. So also the presenters, we are hoping that presenters will be able to answer the questions online to save on time. Sometimes it becomes that we have too many questions. We are hoping to have some time at the end for clarifying questions as well. So before I move too long into this one, I will just want to welcome Valerie to make her opening remarks. And then Valerie, you will welcome Roderick from Kenya. And then Roderick will bring the meeting back to me, and then I'll move on with the other part of the meetings. Over to you, Valerie.
Thank you so much, Harrison, and a big thank you to Secretary Kundu for joining us from Kenya. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. And I want to start by really thanking the SPJ team at the bank, the Social Protection and Jobs team, led by Ifat, who's going to be coming and closing the seminar, because this collaboration is long overdue. Let me put it this way. And you know why? Because we're celebrating 80 years as an institution this year. The IBRD is 80 years old. And I'm sad to say that for a lot of that time, we haven't done a lot on fisheries. And for the last 10, 15 years where we have been working on fisheries, we have focused on the fish. We've had a fish first approach. Then we've thought about the fisheries as an economic sector. And it is an important economic sector. We know how important it is from a jobs and GDP. You're going to hear that from Secretary Kundu. We know how important it is from a food security perspective, especially and nowadays when 750 million people are food insecure, when 49 million people are actually on the brink of famine. Fish is an even more important staple for people, particularly living on small islands, particularly living at or near the coasts. And as we think and have worked on fisheries, we've often thought about large-scale fisheries. And yes, they do produce 60% of the fish that's eaten around the world, but they're only responsible for 10% of the jobs. And that means we haven't spent enough time focusing on small-scale fisheries and more importantly, and this is where the collaboration with SPJ is so important, on the men and women who work across the value chain of small-scale fisheries. It's the fishermen, and yes, I say fishermen, who are out on the boats doing the fishing, because it is mostly men. And it's the fisherwomen who are selling those fish, because it is mostly women who are greeting those men when they come on shore, who are then collecting and cleaning and selling those fish. And these are men and women who, by and large, are using fisheries as part of a multi-livelihood strategy for survival. These are some of the poorest people on the planet. These are the men and women that we exist to serve. And so it's so very important that we think about how much fisheries is their social safety net. And in fact, for many countries, fishing has become an informal de facto social safety net. When people can't get jobs and they live near the coast, if they can't eat, if they don't have money in their pocket to go and buy food, often governments will tacitly say, go fish. Go figure it out yourself. And that's a problem. And it's especially a problem now because of the underlying context that is the triple environmental crisis. We know climate change is making fish move on average 7 kilometers north or south towards the poles every year. So these fishermen who are out in the boats are having to go further every day, risking life and limb, not just their livelihoods, in search of fish that are fleeing. We know the biodiversity crisis means that we have too many collapsing cascades where we have too many fish being fished out. And there's a pollution crisis, which means even the fish that they are catching aren't particularly healthy anymore. That's why this first in a webinar series event is so important, why our collaboration with SPJ is important. And I really do want to thank FAO and IIED especially today for joining us and providing some of the background case studies we're going to hear about. And I do really want to thank the PROBLUE partnership. PROBLUE, of course, is the bank's Ocean Accelerator. It is our think tank on all things related to oceans. It's our venture capital fund that allows us to invest in knowledge creation, knowledge sharing like we're doing today, but also actually in putting our ideas to the test in countries and delivering for people like Secretary Kundu in Kenya. And that partnership, of course, is important to us, not just because it gives us the money to do this, but it gives us ideas and access to the 14 donor countries who are in that partnership to help us think through how we do this better and how we can do it better together in country. So today we're going to hear a lot in terms of case studies and analysis on how to incorporate social protection and labor market interventions in our fish projects. How do we shift in environment from doing fish first projects that have traditionally been about fish stock management to fisher people first projects that make sure we are serving the fishermen and women who rely on the fish stocks, that we remember our mission is to end poverty on a livable planet. But it's also to help SPJ think about, as they develop their projects and their pipelines, how do we ensure fishery communities are included in their social protection interventions? Because it goes both ways. Too often fishery communities are left out of formal social safety net projects. They don't have financial inclusion. They're not included in all sorts of unemployment insurance schemes and cash transfer schemes. How can we make sure that is changed? And how can we make sure, in a world where we're actively discussing and hoping member states ratify the new World Trade Organization agreement on fish subsidies repurposing, and these fish subsidies are worth $35 billion a year, $22 billion a year, of which are perverse. They're actually not helping fisher communities and they're not helping fish stocks. How can we make sure that as those subsidies shift and are repurposed, that they're done so to benefit fishery communities and the countries that rely on that fishery sector for jobs and GDP? And so that becomes really important. Because at the end of the day, this conversation today and many more to come, and all of the analysis that has been done to help us understand both sides and bring environment and SPJ together is fundamentally about realizing our commitment, which is to put people first. And in this case, make sure that whether it's an environment or whether it's an SPJ, we are putting the fishery communities at the forefront of our thinking and our design. And as we scale up support to them, that we do it in a way that allows them the security and the safety they need. And with that, we're going to hand over to Secretary Kundo to hear from him about what's going on in Kenya and where they think this relationship between fisheries and social protection and jobs make a difference.
Thank you very much, Valerie. First, I want to thank you and the bank for inviting Kenya to be part of this conversation, to share our experiences with the other countries. The government of Kenya recognizes the blue economy as an emerging frontier for economic development, and it is reflected in our visionary and national strategic documents as a contributor towards achieving national development goals. I should point out that when we speak about the blue economy in Kenya, we are using the African Union definition because it includes both ocean and fresh water. Most of our fisheries is coming from the inland water bodies as well as in the marine environment. The small-scale fisheries and aquaculture make up over 90% of the national fish production, contributing to food and nutrition security, to employment, income generation, as well as to the broader rural economy development. The fisheries sector is facing challenges related to fishing capacity and malpractices. Fishing capacity in the sense that we are having so many people now turning to the water bodies available for purposes of economic reasons and as a social safety net, as Valerie had said. So this has contributed to declining fish catches. There is also pollution and environmental degradation. And this combined with the effects of climate change does not underpin sustainable development. And the interplay of these factors have undermined the economic efficiency of our fisheries because now the catches are very low. The income is also going down. And the factors also compromise the ecological integrity of the environment that supports fish replenishment, because fish critical habitats are normally affected when we have effects of climate change, and also the bad fishing practices, especially in the shallow waters where the fish normally breeds. This is threatening the livelihoods of the fisherfolk communities. Most of them rely solely on the fish, and any changes in the fishing environment has effect on many households that rely on it. So the government of Kenya is undertaking reforms in policy, regulatory and institutional frameworks, production in fisheries. However, social protection policies are also in place aimed at reducing socioeconomic risks and vulnerability of the affected fisherfolk communities. The social protection and the labor market interventions are entrenched in several ways, including alternative sources of livelihoods. The government is now trying to involve other sectors like agriculture, tourism, forestry, so that we have the fisherfolk who are affected by the declining catches, or when we have close seasons for fishing, sometimes they engage into agriculture, growing tomatoes or beekeeping, or the young men riding boats around for ecotourism. We're also doing trainings, especially for coxswains and seafarers, as well as bodybuilding, so that these people, most of them, can move away from the real fishing and contribute to the industry at different levels. Then the government also has introduced cash transfer schemes, especially for the aged and retired fishers. This ones alleviates the effects of vulnerability at the household level. The government is also providing facilities to support the services that are related to fishing, health, and education, so that these people can also live a dignified life. These types of interventions demonstrate the importance of taking a cross-sectoral and cross-ministerial approach, even when our focus is fisheries, so that measures can be adapted to the fisheries sector and to enable the transition to and from different sectors, and for an integrated development of the sectors that form part of the blue economy strategy. It also means that we need to look beyond just fisheries in the fishing communities to include education, health, and other such fundamental issues. Lastly, I would like to highlight that the blue economy with respect to fisheries and aquaculture has benefited through grants from the strong partnerships between Kenya and development partners, not least with the World Bank, and including the case study that we will hear more about later in this week. Thank you very much for giving me this chance.
Thank you very much, Roderick, for that very, very wonderful presentation of what Kenya is doing to help us to manage our fisheries in a better way, and also to ensure that the families that depend on the fisheries are taken care of. You have made quite a number of points there that are very important. Valerie too also mentioned quite a few things that are very, very important on what we are doing at the World Bank to ensure that this sector is taken care of. As Valerie said, this is a series that we are beginning today, and we are hoping to be continuing with this series as time passes. We are encouraging, obviously, good discussions in the room so that we can all learn and don't go home with your questions. So I encourage people to put their questions in the chat. We try as much as possible to answer them. Others might be done online. I encourage the presenters to do that. But whichever is not answered today, we will still have some time to answer it later on, and we'll get back to you on that. Without much ado, I will move on to our presentation on an overview of the case studies and the whole of the SPJ, this series of meetings that we are starting today on integrating social protection with fisheries management for sustainability. We are going to be joined now by Yuko Okamura, Senior Social Protection Economist with the Social Protection Global Department of the World Bank. And they will be presenting with Gunilla Gregg, our fisheries consultant, Social Protection Global Department at the World Bank, and Annabelle Bladon, Senior Researcher, International Institute of Development and Environment. They will decide how they're going to make that presentation. Over.
Thank you, Harrison. And hi, everybody. The team is very excited to have this webinar today. So thank you very much for joining. I'm just overwhelmed with so many people connected from the different parts of the world. So before going to the main deliverable, which produced after like years of work, I would just like to very quickly give the context overview. So allow me to do that. And this is actually a journey since 2020. And when this initial conversation took between the social protection team and environment team with the support with the PROBLUE, how we can really connect better leverage, social protection job intervention of the fishery. So with the team, really started thinking, put the brain together from the two sectors, and identify, let's start with the global stock taking, what are the relevant experience already exist in the world? And then that started with, and finding there are actually some good practice like different social protection instruments, social insurance, assistance programs are already adapted to promote sustainable fisheries. But these examples are still fairly limited, we can say. But based on that, the kind of like a good practice stock taking, we still try to manage to identify what we call the opportunity points, where the social protection level intervention can specifically contribute to the fishery management. That's, as we call it, the conceptual framework. So that was 2021. And bringing to that, the next question was how we can actually look at this conceptual framework in a more practical way. And we did realize a country case study would be very practical. And with that, so for that purpose, we had a kind of like internal consultation with the World Bank team, working on relevant projects, looking at the pipelines and ongoing projects, whether no relevant engagement are already taking place at the country level. And with that, we identified the 5 countries based on the scope of their engagement and the country interest. And then that's resulted in the production of the country case study, which are already led by the regional team coming from the 4 regions. And in parallel, the question is not only limited to these 5 countries, how we can share this experience and knowledge with the wider countries, no, which are facing the similar challenges, but interesting to do, but they don't necessarily know where to start. So that's the motivation, what we call the handbook, which is synthesized the practical knowledge for the people who are already working on the ground in other countries for better take up of this approach. And then I would like to acknowledge all the team members. And this already shows who are the main people who already worked on the case studies and the handbook, who are going to be the main focus of today's presentation. Noting there are also more people who already worked behind, and there are also new people who are starting to work more on this activity. But again, at the global team, my co-partner at the fisheries sector, Ganila Greg, and from the social protection, I have meeting at the global team level. And I really would like to thank the partnership with the IIED, because they are really instrumental. And it's really actually the joint work, no? And plus, again, country case studies are really led by the country teams, PTLs or the both from the fishery sector, environment sector, and the social protection sector. I wish I could actually name all of them, but because of the time, please just look at this. And we will have a more opportunity to hear the specific example, like a story from the case study in the latter part, second part of the presentation. And of course, I would really like to acknowledge the precious partnership with the FAO. And good to see some of people connected, because they have also relevant similar effort, no? So for fish project. So we have been coordinating throughout the journey over the past 4 years. And we also benefited from the partnership from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iceland, who kindly offered the fishery expert who advised the toolkit. And of course, like other partners, important partners on this field, including the World of Fish, and ICSF has been also really providing the instrumental inputs to make sure this toolkit and the case study toolkit are not only relevant for the World Bank, but also broader community who have been working on this, so that we can really join the effort to advance this integrated agenda. So let me stop here and to pass it to Annabelle Blando from the IIED to share the sneak preview of the handbook and what's in there. Yeah, over to you, Annabelle.
Thanks, Yuko. Hi, everyone. Yes, IIED has been collaborating on this work with the bank for a long time now, so it's a pleasure to introduce this upcoming handbook, which I've been given the impossible task of distilling into 10 minutes, so I'm just going to dive right in. This is a handbook on leveraging social protection and jobs for more sustainable fisheries. I just wanted to flag for anyone outside of the bank who's less familiar with this terminology, particularly the jobs bit and the acronym SPJ, that we're talking about interventions that aim to prevent or protect people from poverty and vulnerability. So social assistance, social insurance, labour market interventions, as well as complementary demand side policies and programmes that help create jobs and connect workers to them. Next slide, please. The aim of this handbook is to provide practical knowledge on this approach of using social protection and jobs to facilitate and enable more productive and sustainable fisheries. What's the rationale behind it? Fisheries are important in so many different ways, as Valerie highlighted. Not only do they provide livelihoods and food security to the people directly involved, they also make huge contributions to wider society, for example, in terms of poverty reduction and prevention, action on climate and nature, and food and nutrition. But fish stocks are in global decline. And based on evidence from a range of sectors, including farming and forestry, we believe that SPJ interventions have untapped potential to facilitate fisheries policy reforms and strengthen management. The handbook is primarily targeted at people looking for innovative ways to support sustainable fisheries. So this includes practitioners working within and with ministries responsible for fisheries, as well as social protection and finance. In terms of scope, the handbook focuses on the small-scale fisheries sector, but it's relevant for a range of contexts and motivations. So whether practitioners are looking to improve the sector on a national level, or maybe trying to address a specific problem in a specific fishery or area. And it provides knowledge on both the why and the how of this approach. So on the right, there's an overview of the handbook structure. It has 5 main sections: the introduction, the problem statement, a conceptual framework, which is based on that which we published in the policy note, outlining how this approach can work, a section on the methodology and data sources, so outlining what information is needed to implement the approach and how can it be obtained, and priorities moving forward. So now I'm just going to very briefly run through sections 2 to 5. Next slide, please. So this section of the handbook, sets out why this approach is needed. So what are the challenges that need to be addressed? Some of you will have seen this visual before. This was also in the policy note that we published a few years ago. It's a bit too complex for our purposes today, but it illustrates nicely the socioeconomic and ecological aspects of the fishery sector and the specific risks that people in the sector face arising from interlinked processes or drivers within those socioeconomic and ecological systems. So starting on the left, what I want to draw your attention to is the fact that human activities are driving changes in ecosystems that are increasing socioeconomic risks in the fishery sector through their impacts on ecological hazards. So in the ocean, this is primarily due to intense fishing pressure, compounded by other drivers such as climate change, pollution, and coastal development. And then at the same time, moving towards the right, we have socioeconomic drivers of risk that increase human vulnerability or exposure to hazards. And then a lot of these relate to the mostly informal nature of small-scale fisheries, which often leads to invisibility in policy and investment decisions, and means that fisheries workers and their communities can face a range of structural constraints and inequities that fuel their vulnerability to climate hazards and other shocks. And then on top of this, current efforts to manage fisheries are often limited by short-term perspectives and a lack of consideration for their wider societal contributions, which gives rise to inadequate institutional coordination and insufficient and often misguided investment, for example, those harmful fisheries subsidies. And this means that fisheries management and conservation interventions can have really substantial costs for fisheries actors in the short to medium term, typically in the form of lost income. And this can reduce acceptance of and compliance with fisheries regulations and undermine the effectiveness of management measures. Next slide, please. So moving to our conceptual framework, this outlines the three main opportunities to leverage SPJ interventions for productive and sustainable fisheries. And these are arranged here kind of in order of our interest. So starting with number one in brown, these interventions can be deliberately designed or adapted to directly incentivize specific actions that support fisheries policy objectives and associated management measures. And this can work in two main ways. Firstly, programs like conditional transfers, public works can compensate for those short to medium term costs of management measures like seasonal closures that are designed to reduce fishing effort. And then secondly, where longer term interventions might be required to reduce the total numbers of fisheries workers, SPJ can facilitate livelihood diversification and labour market transformation. Moving to number two in orange, even if an SPJ intervention is not directly linked to any specific desirable action, it can still help to create the enabling conditions for sustainable fisheries. So countries can use existing mainstream SPJ programs to reduce overall vulnerability and enhance shock responsiveness, which can enable environmental stewardship. But it should be noted that these approaches in particular can also increase fishing effort if interventions are not aligned or coordinated with fisheries policy and complemented by proper monitoring and enforcement of management measures. And finally, number three in blue, SPJ can also help to enable and incentivize fisheries actors to register. So when supported by targeted outreach, this registration can provide the data that are fundamental to fisheries management and can also support integrated SPJ programs. So although it's at the bottom here, the two-way arrows highlight that this is kind of a prerequisite to the opportunities above. Next slide. So moving to the methodology and data sources section, this provides practical guidance for collecting and analysing the information required to put that conceptual framework into practice. It outlines how to conduct socioeconomic profiling and assess those social ecological risks in fisheries. And it guides readers through cross-sectoral assessments of institutional arrangements and policy, programs and implementation systems, and financing. And many of the approaches outlined are relatively easy and quick. A lot of them involve desk-based review and analysis of existing documents, databases, and statistics. And we've also included some additional methods and tools that can be used to fill information gaps if time and resources allow, some of which are pictured here. For example, adapting national household surveys to better capture the right information from fisheries sector. Next slide. So finally, what are the priority actions that governments and development partners can take moving forward? A crucial first step is to recognise the wider and longer term societal benefits that fisheries provide. This shift in mindset should enable more coordination and collaboration between and within ministries responsible for fisheries and social protection, as well as finance. Enhancing cooperation with and between non-governmental actors is also necessary, as they play a really critical intermediary role with fisheries actors. Initial investments are going to be needed to improve data, information, and systems for designing and implementing SPJ interventions that are integrated or aligned and coordinated with fisheries policy objectives, and for systematic monitoring and evaluation. And finally, there is huge potential for countries to mobilize finance for this purpose by repurposing harmful fishery subsidies, and also a need to identify more innovative financing solutions. So that's it for me. Thanks for listening. I'll hand back over to Hugo.
Oh, thank you very much, Annabelle. And the rest of your team members, Yuko and Gunila. I think this is very well done. We are now going to move on to the country case studies, and we are going to be hearing from different presenters from different countries. We are starting with Costa Rica. Luz Stella Rodriguez will bring us to speed. Then we'll go to Kenya with Kevwe Pela. Over to Solomon Islands, Anita Kendrick will do that, and Sri Lanka will be Tiji Narine. Finally, Vietnam by Nga Thi Nguyen. So I will want you to move on in that order. We are strictly keeping it 5 minutes per presenter so that we can have some time at the end for questions. I encourage again that you put questions in the chat. I have seen a few questions that are going on, but not so much. We need to have more questions coming in now. So over to you, Luz, on Costa Rica.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting us to this event. As you know, Costa Rica is an upper middle income Central American country that has experienced sustained economic growth in the past decade. They have an outward-looking growth model. They have done massive improvements in human capital and also have effective governance. However, Costa Rica faces a lot of inequality issues, and the income inequality and territorial disparities persist. The income of that comes from labor and job activities has reduced, especially in the poor groups, and there's more reliance lately on social cash transfers. The country economic growth benefits that have not necessarily been shared with some fisheries communities, which face different challenges, including increased climate risk, fishing and environmental regulations, also barriers to access relevant social programs, and also poverty. It is estimated that nearly 70% of the fisheries communities belong to the 30% of the bottom population, of the poor population. The World Bank had a project led by the environment team for the sustainable fisheries development, and it included a component on strengthening mechanisms for social environmental sustainability. In that sense, they invited the social protection team to support the development of the project. So with this framework, we start working on a case study to better understand the socioeconomic conditions of low-income and vulnerable artisanal fishing communities in 2 selected regions in Costa Rica. Our objective was to identify how these communities were, what were the sorts of labor opportunities that they have, and try to explore what sort of social protection programs could benefit these communities. So we wanted to understand this link or this intersection between social protection and fishing. We selected 2 low-income communities together with the government institution that handles fisheries in Costa Rica called Incopesca, and we explored 3 different activities or 3 different aspects. First, the socioeconomic characteristics of the households who depend from fishing and mollusk gathering activities. Second, the productive profile of the territories where we were working, because we wanted to explore if there were other activities where these communities could move to. And also we wanted to do like a gap assessment to identify the connection between the population and the labor opportunities. For this, we use a survey for fishers, and also we did semi-structured interviews with the small business in the area, and analysis also of labor profile of the population. Our findings are summarized here. I'm not going to go through all of them because we only have 5 minutes, but 1 minute. But basically what we got from this study is that there is a lot of segregation in the gender segregation in the labor market. There is a need for more training, for more development of soft skills, also to link financial inclusion capacities for these communities, and also access to basic social protection services, including health and social insurance. Also, we identified in the labor side that there were not necessarily a lot of jobs for this population, and if they were, they needed more training for the workers. And also we found a lot of lack of coordination between institutions on social protection and the fisheries side, and also a lack of incentives to work together. So our main recommendations are around the fact that there's no single actor that can respond to this very complex and multidimensional challenge. So we think that there needs to be like a more inclusive productive inclusion strategy that links does like a better labor profiling and connects people with job opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, and of course services. Unfortunately, the project, the IPF that was organizing all these activities was cancelled by the government, but we continue working, providing technical assistance, mainly on how to link the social registry and the fisheries registries, because as Annabelle mentioned, we believe in the critical role of data to have a better provision of social services in Costa Rica. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luz, for that presentation. I think you have tried to squeeze the time in. Very appreciated. We go to Kenya. Kewepela, take over.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I'll just
5 minutes.
Yes, I'll just go straight to the context so that I can cover a lot. So first of all, poverty and vulnerability are intertwined in Kenya, and there's increasing temperature, which could lead to more frequent drought condition, significantly threatening water and food security. We also know that the coastal areas, though endowed with valuable coastal and freshwater resources, are one of the least developed countries, with 44.7% of the population classified as multidimensionally poor compared to the 37.5% of national average. We also know that the situation is worse when we look at the monetary poor, where 62% of the coastal population live below the poverty line. We know that the fishery sector has the potential to contribute to food security, but the sector faces several challenges, including overexploitation of the fishing resources, as well as inefficient management. We know that climate change is also intensifying the existing challenges in the sector. And what we also know is that the government of Kenya are trying to put in place or have put in place some mitigating measures to improve fishery sector, by increasing surveillance and also some monitoring impacts in the country. However, there's still concerns about whether the fishery sector can actually be sustainably explored and serve as the next frontier for food security, since some of the concerns arise from overexploitation of fishing resources, which has led to reduction in fishery stocks. Next, please. Next. What is the purpose of this case study? The purpose of our case study is to highlight how contributing or combining social protection and fishing management programs can help support the poorest and most vulnerable fishing households to cope with short-term income threats resulting from government measures to improve fishery management. And what we know is that only 8.7% of Kenyans benefit from some form of social safety net. even though 37% of the population live in extreme poverty, and that there's limited social protection coverage is linked to low investment in social protection, accounting for just less than 2% of the country's GDP. And we know that access to social protection is usually through formal employment, which only about 14% of Kenya's workforce have access to. And also, we know that to improve the access to social safety net, the World Bank as well as the government of Kenya have introduced some innovations in social protection, and some lessons can be learned from the Kenya's flagship hunger safety net program, which has been effective in delivering income support to food insecure households, and also the active labor market policies that have helped to address unemployment constraints. And we feel like that, or we know that if some of these lessons learned in these programs are transferred to the fishery sector, then the fishery sector has the potential to actually grow. Now we go to our next, please. So we go to the key findings. So we found a lot of interesting things. We did a lot of analysis. We compared coastal versus non-coastal areas, but because of time, we included only the key findings with regards to the fishing and aquaculture sector. Now we used basically secondary data analysis, and we also did some DEX research and did some stakeholder engagement. The secondary data we used was from 2019 Kenyan Continuous Household Survey, as well as 2015 Integrated Household Survey. And some of the interesting things we found with regards to the fishing aquaculture sector is that they only represent 0.4% of the total population, total employment, but are important sources of livelihood for the coastal and lake communities, where the sector employs approximately 68,500 individuals, but indirectly employs more than 2 million Kenyans in fishery and pre-harvest and post-harvest activities, including fish processing, retail trading, and to name a few. We know that most fishing and aquaculture activities are small scale with high proportion of juvenile fish catches. We also know that the fishing and aquaculture sector is unable to meet the growing fishing demands of Kenya. So for example, currently the demand for fishes is about 800,000 metric ton, but currently the fishing sector is only able to provide about 150,000 metric ton as a result of poor technology being used, and also the overexploitation and low fish and the declining of fishing stocks.
You should be winding up. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move to next. So I just want to cover some of the key policy channels that we feel like that can be leveraged to improve the fishery sector. One is to strengthen the social protection and insurance policy, to consider those that are informally employed, including fishery sector, so that to allow them able to save and also diversify their income, especially when the government engage in measures that reduces fishing activities to improve, to create time for the fishery stocks to regrow, since there's currently overexploitation. The second policy channel that can be leveraged is when there's a restriction in fishing activities, there's need to support fish production by reducing overfishing, allowing fishing production to recover. They must also have plans to help the affected community who rely on fishing for their livelihood by providing alternative source of livelihood. There must be support for small-scale fishers in several ways, including assisting fishers obtain certification as a way to incentivize them, helping fishers get officially registered and licensed to be able to access formal channels, and also testing innovative practices like introducing and testing new fishing methods and management practices that have been proven in other countries. The fourth is support economic diversification and job creation through active labor market policies, so that there are less people that rely on
Kevwe, I'll have to stop you there, unfortunately, because we have run on over time.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not just, I think that's the way to go. Then we have Solomon Allans coming in. Anita Kendrick, you take over, but before you take over, I just want to say, to help you people who are remaining to present, if you can give us the key findings, because the context can be, one sentence or something, and then give us the key findings, because that's what we want to focus on. That will be very useful. Then we can discuss. Thank you very much. Anita.
Oh, thank you, everyone. All right, I'll start quickly with asking the question, why did we do a blue social protection study in the Solomon Islands? Primarily, we know that that fisheries plays a critical role in the national economy and for food security and livelihoods. And almost half of the households in the country are involved in fishing, and women also play a pivotal role in that. And also, fishing households are vulnerable. Our vulnerability assessment, we looked at, and we see that people are extremely at high risk of natural disasters and climate change threats. And there's also multidimensional poverty with limited assets and access to services for fishing households as compared to non-fishing households. And then the formal social protection systems in the Solomon Islands for fishing households are extremely limited. But we also know that fishing households are extremely resilient. They're pluriactive, which means that they are engaged in both, fishing households are engaged in other activities along with fishing. And that informal social protection also helps to provide their resilience. And this informal social protection comes from family, clan, and church, but it may often be inadequate for large-scale shocks. Next slide, please. So the case study was primarily exploratory because we really knew very little about it, and there was very little active World Bank social protection program in the Solomon Islands at the time. And so we were really aiming to explore the potential for opportunities to integrate social protection and fisheries management and better understand fishing livelihoods. The study was implemented by the World Bank together with World Fish, the International Food Policy Research Institute, and the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources of the Solomon Islands. And we used a mix of quantitative and qualitative data analysis. Next slide, please. So what did we learn about fisheries management and social protection? It's really interesting that in the Solomon Islands, the government has used community-based resource management, or they've adopted this as their primary strategy for managing small-scale fisheries and natural resources. And this builds on a strong tradition of conservation and community rights that's in the Solomon Islands and really throughout the Pacific island countries. They've supported through the government, the government helps them to prepare community management plans with defined zones and management rules and regulations. Now, as Valerie mentioned, fisheries can also provide a safety net, and this is very much the perception in the Solomon Islands, particularly in the absence of more formal social protection models, that they often view fisheries as a social safety net. And there were a lot of examples of that from COVID time when people came back to their communities. They had to leave the cities, came back to their communities, and they were able to take up fishing as a way to survive during that time. But this will only work if fisheries are well managed. And there are a number of reasons that this creates a sort of a downward spiral if they're not well managed. So social protection and jobs mechanisms then can provide mechanisms, they can provide opportunities to introduce SPJ mechanisms such as alternative livelihood development or jobs programs that can be incentives for compliance with fisheries management, or they can provide compensation, particularly to those who are negatively impacted by, for example, closure of fishing grounds or closure of takes of particular species. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we feel there is a strong potential for integrating SPJ mechanisms with fisheries management in the Solomon Islands, and that it's also relevant and scalable to other Pacific Island countries.
1 minute.
Okay, there's a strong need for continuing support for strengthening CBRM in the Solomons and other PICs, and that we should do this in a more people-centered way. This could be done through a CBRM plus approach, in which linking social protection and complementary services with the CBRM program's governance, management, and community organization structures could provide an entry point for introducing alternative livelihoods and other kind of social protection measures. Success will require political commitment and good leadership, breaking institutional silos, which we all know is difficult, but this has been a good start. This program has been a great start in the World Bank in breaking those institutional silos, and leveraging financing, which we particularly should be looking at opportunities with climate finance, and then of course ensuring and fostering community buy-in and involvement. So linking fisheries management with social protection provides a new way of thinking about small-scale fisheries in Pacific Island countries with a focus on households. And this will allow us a more targeted strategy for improving fisheries management and livelihoods and building resistance. And I think this is the key sort of paradigm shift that we need to make in looking at in data and our system of analysis when we
Anita, I wish I had more time for you. I am just loving what you are presenting, but I have to
that was exactly where I was ending anyway. That's exactly.
So thanks a lot, really appreciated. We will move on now to Sri Lanka. Ian, please take over.
Can you hear me? Just to check.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. I'll be presenting on behalf of not only my co-authors, but also the entire team involved in fisheries in Sri Lanka. So we have had a technical assistance program for the past 4 years. Sri Lanka is a middle-income country which has experienced a very significant economic and financial crisis starting in 2022, still reeling from it, but it is making improvements. But as it has been implementing a program to achieve macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability, it has also faced very limited fiscal space. During the economic crisis, there was need for more social assistance due to the poverty that was caused as part during the crisis. But during that process, also social assistance programs were streamlined for increased targeting and efficiency under an umbrella program called Asvesuma. Now, fishers were particularly affected by the crisis because as food prices rose, as fuel and other imports were either very scarce or very expensive. Yet fisheries support about 2.7 million, or about 12% of the population. And in particular, coastal fisheries are very important for job creation and for nutrient intakes, in particular protein. However, access to coastal fisheries is unrestricted, even though co-management, the principle of co-management is embedded in, is not implemented. So as a result, as the FAO has estimated, most coastal stocks are overfished, and this has happened especially since the mid 2000s, when effort increased. And under effort, we understand more people being engaged in fisheries, coastal fisheries, more boats, more efficient gear. So now the Department of Fisheries, of course, and in fact, even at the presidential level, the government is aware of the situation, and there is a strong intention to to develop and implement fisheries management plans. However, as we spoke, and also in other cases, there are short-term costs to fishers, and access restrictions are difficult to implement. Next slide, please. As part of our engagement, we have focused on a case study on southern spiny lobster, which is a very important export commodity. But although fishers have, some lobster fishers have license to do so, many others also fish lobster. As a result, we found, as part of our stock assessment, or the stock assessment that we supported, that the stock is now at about 20% of the theoretical carrying capacity. An FMP, a fisheries management plan, is being elaborated, and an extended closure is considered as one of the management options to rebuild the stock. So we ran a bioeconomic model to look at the economic impacts, short-term and long-term economic impacts of such a measure. We found that in the short term, not unexpectedly, of course, there would be losses to lobster fishers and to the economy that would put pressure on other vulnerable stocks as fishers try to diversify. In the long term, however, there would be economic gains if effort is kept constant. Now, but that is very difficult. There's a big enforcement challenge for the reasons I mentioned earlier. When the effort needs to be kept constant to maintain the improved stock levels. So the question was for us then, so how can SPJ help to address these challenges? So I'll skip the methodology section and move to the next slide, and just give present the main findings.
I give it 1 more minute.
That should be enough, yes. Now, it's very clear under the current fiscal conditions that compensation of all lobster fishers is not possible. The ministry is very clear. This would not be replicable. If they did it in one area, they would have to do it in all fisheries, and that would just be impossible. And in fact, lobster fishers with whom we talked are prepared to accept closure if and only if it's well enforced. By I mean, of course, lobster fishers, the licensed lobster fishers, right? So, however, we do feel that poor and very poor fishers will have difficulty to cope. They don't have the means, the flexibility to attain other income sources during that period. So, but any social assistance programs should be done in cooperation and coordination with this new streamlined Asvesuma program. For long-term sustainability, to reduce effort, or to rather keep effort constant, economic inclusion programs would be called for all coastal fishers. But there are actually livelihood programs directed to fishers, fishing communities. However, they need to be improved to take into account the diverse constraints that fishing households usually face, and also to be more linked with with market realities, market demand, to be sustainable. And also there should be an increase in active labor market programs for alternative livelihoods. Co-management and improved enforcement is key for sustainability. So these two things, SPJ and sound fishery management, has to go hand in hand. There are also some good experiences in FMP development with low-cost community welfare programs.
I will also stop you there, Dijan.
Okay.
Unfortunately, you have taken more than I thought, but
that's fine.
Thank you very much.
That's fine. I think I got it.
I have been a bit lenient, if you notice, because you're answering questions in the chat. So please keep answering them so that we can have less time for the questions.
Thank you.
Have to manage time. Thank you very much, Dijan. We are moving now to Vietnam. Ngati Nguyen, please take over.
Yeah, thank you.
5 minutes.
Good afternoon. I expect that I'm the last one, so I should have like 2 minutes because of the last.
I will be lenient as well, but I can't punish you for the rest.
Okay. Okay. So thanks for letting me present on behalf of the team. I would like to say that actually it is a very exciting work. I believe that is also the same previous presenter already mentioned. Like it is, a new way of engagement from SPJ, right? Because normally we often talk about, purely on like solicitation, so this is the labor market, but within in a broader context. But this one is like kind of linking in a specific sector. And I think that in this case, in fishery, that I think that is a very kind of interesting work that we have never been doing in the past. So I think that is really a new way of doing it, and also that as we see a lot of like the important role of the SPJ in working across different sector, especially in this case ENB. Okay, so what I'm going to present you is about the analysis that the team has been producing based on the two data sets. One is the household living standard survey and also the labor force survey. And the analysis is kind of looking at the profile of the fishery household, as well as the profile of the worker who engage in the overall fishery value chains. So you also very very well about the Vietnam is one of the top producer actually, and also the third largest exporter of the fish products globally. But at the same time, that country is also facing challenges in terms of fish stock productivity as is kind of declined. When we look into the survey and the data, and then it's found that it's around 2.7% of the household survey, and also 1.7 million workers engaged in fishery and aquaculture in Vietnam. And when we look into income, and it's kind of the average income per capita per month of fishery and fishing and aquaculture household actually is much higher than in agriculture. Of course, it's a bit lower to the rest of the economy. And we often, during the implementation of the poverty reduction program, the government is always referring fishery is one way of, helping households to escape of the poverty for the past, 20 years. And then it's like we also like finding out that one of the challenges when we look into the data is that mostly like as high as 70% of the paid worker in fishery and aquaculture sector work informally, meaning that they don't have access to social insurance, and only 0% of the percent of the self-employed worker have social insurance through the voluntary social scheme. In addition to that, we also ask the question of, do you face any vulnerability in terms of different shock? And fishery households often, are more vulnerable to natural disaster than any other household. In addition to the, to analysis that we use from the two data set, we also review, existing legal regulatory framework and policy exists. And the finding is showing that there's some subsidized policy encouraging fishery, invest in large-scale venture are still active. It is this kind. The discussion already mentioned before is this may contribute into fishing pressure. That could be, can be one resulted in a negative aspect. But then the policy has been, introduced for more than 10 years now, but then it still, still remains active. However, the government is also realized that there's need to, to strengthen the regulatory framework in order to, to sustain the environment, and that is why the new scheme, which is aimed to reduce about 2,000 inshore fishing vessels and 100 offshore fishing vessels by 2025. However, we also found out that the target is very ambitious, but at the same time that there's no clear measure to support the impacted household who may be losing a job due to this kind of the intervention. At the same time that Vietnam, social protection system also evolving, but then it's really the program remains small and fragmented, especially compared to other sector. So why fishery sector is kind of providing one of the a way of providing a livelihood to poor household. In order to to sustain their income, to provide the income, how to make sure that they follow sustainable practice, and also ensuring the sustainable environments. We find it's a lot of there's a role of social protection in this discussion. One of the things that we find that why the government is kind of moving into the whole government approach on digital transformation, we think that it is need to to improve the interministerial collaboration to engage and support informal self-employed fisher and fisher worker to register their activity in employee with the respective responsible agency. At the same time, as I already mentioned, there's several database has been now started kind of integrating with different types of databases, social protection database with other types of the database, which is like a new government initiative. So it's really a good way of kind of bringing different types of database together. In this case, the social protection database with the fishery database, in order to identify the fishery worker and also in order to provide supports to the impacted or vulnerable fishery household. The next one is as I already mentioned, the recent scheme to reduce 2,000 household or 2,000 ship and vessel by 2025. But then that is the role of how to make sure that the impacted household or impacted worker who lose a job from this scheme can also be provided with different types of intervention, especially in this case is the labor market intervention program, such as job search assistance or loan or startup capital for a new venture. And the last recommendation I also would like to mention is that why Vietnam have a some set of the adaptive social protection method, but it's very limited to small, to short. In this case, we also found out that okay, why fishery household is facing or more vulnerable to natural resources disaster. It should have like the adaptive social protection system or measures should be expanded to different types of stock to make sure that it protects the people of fishery who engage in fishery sector can also be supported in case of disaster or natural shock, for example. And also the last point I also want to mention is like now the country is now piloting the insurance scheme for in agriculture sector. So it's also really good to expand, the pilot, the social insurance, the insurance scheme to other types of sector. In this case, is piloting the insurance scheme to fishery sector, given the vulnerability of the capture fishery sector to natural disaster. So that is the finding from analysis as well as a recommendation from the team. And since Vietnam is preparing a new fishery project, so we also believe that with the key finding and recommendation that we also would like to follow up with the ENP team, to make sure that the project also benefited from this of intervention that we propose. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I've been very lenient with you as you had requested. It's good to ask sometimes. So we are now at the place where we can entertain some discussions. Very thankful for the presenters because of the fact that you did not only present, but also you answered the number of the questions that are in the chat. Because of time, there's one question that has been asked a few minutes ago or seconds ago. That's the question that I want to bring to the presenters. This question is from Daniela Kalkowski, very key question. And she's saying that it's encouraging to see the World Bank advocating for the linkages between social protection and fisheries management. Based on current studies and future directions, what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities for mainstreaming social protection fisheries management moving forward? I think this is a very important question that I want to throw at everybody. We have learned quite a lot from today's presentations here. I mean, there are so many differences in different countries, but there are underlying issues. I think one of the some very interesting statement that was made here. Was it Annabelle or was it Solomon Island? The question, the thing was that for this all SPJ to work, it's important that we have fisheries management that is working. I think this is really critical. So, I mean, based on that, I think it's important to, again, try to think about this as an issue. The SPJ, this work you are doing is really helping to support a system that has been very difficult, especially the small-scale fisheries, when it comes to how to manage them. And I can see wonderful things like being able to register people. That has been a nightmare for so long, because now when they're coming to get these cash transfers or whatever, it makes them able to, to get registered. And we can get some data that is very helpful for policymakers. So I will throw this question, and not necessarily everybody will have the chance to answer it, because we have only 3 minutes. I don't know whether I should go to Luz in the room or somebody else. Let me start from the room. Luz, can you tell us what challenges you found that might stop this, this thing from happening?
Yeah, no, we found many challenges, but I will concentrate in 3 main things that I believe that need to be addressed. First is stop working in silos and start promote more coordination between social protection and fisheries agencies and also institutions. They have very, since social protection agencies have like a poverty approach, and the fisheries sector is more a productive approach. I think that they need to marry each other and to understand that to move this agenda, they need collective work. Second, data. I think that there is a key to include fisheries in the social registries and improve interoperability between fisheries registries and social registries. And third is understanding that fisheries are not like a homogeneous group, and you need to develop tailored approaches to cover the specific needs of different coastal communities. I will leave it there.
Well, thank you very much. Yuko, you want to give the fire?
Very quickly, if I can also come in, build up on what just Luz said, no? Because that's also related to her first point, no, working on silo. And what is a breakthrough? Because we have been, as a group, no, we have been really struggling and discussing. And the starting point, which also highlighted in the handbook, is maybe really understanding what is the broader benefit this integrated approach working together would bring. As Luz said, if we just look at the social protection program per se, mainstream program, fishery workers are vulnerable, poor, but a small number, in terms of the volume, and that's similar things. But once we started looking, this is actually food and nutrition security. It's actually about like making the social protection more adaptive to which is also bread and butter to the social protection. I think that same thing applies to fishery sector. And the one example, like Harrison said, about the registering people, there is a mutual benefit if you do work it together. So I think that's really the starting point. If you can really start thinking jointly, recognize a broader benefit which can bring by working across the sector. So I think that's a really important point. We have to continue working and continue to sharing, discussing among us, but also beyond with the governmental counterparts and the partners, they've been working together. So
thank you very much, Yuko. Thank you very much, Luz, for that. I believe definitely the bank is leading in this area in terms of this new thing we are doing in collaboration. I think this is really key. Silo mentality should not be there because it doesn't help us. Now, when the social protection is in another department and fisheries in another department, it doesn't work. And also there are other issues with the blue economy, the other sectors that also can come in. I see one hand up, so I will take that one hand up and then we will go to closing remarks, please. I give you 30 seconds. I know you can. Gunilla.
Was that my hand, Harrison? Yes, thank you all. I'm chuffed by all the discussion we had in the chat box, and we will follow up on that separately as well. So that's been really stimulating. I've been trying to read and type very briefly, but you started referring to Daniela's comment on wider vulnerability issues, and of course that is one of the starting points and why we're looking at this framework from two angles. It's fisheries management, which is sort of the ultimate objective that we wanted to get at, but we're targeted in enabling fishing communities to participate in fisheries management. And that's what we're looking at, both the broader vulnerability issues in fishing communities and the specific fisheries management issues as the sort of second leg of this exercise. But I'm not going to take up much time, just emphasizing that that is the broader framework, and to thank everybody who's been participating so actively in the chat and in this webinar. And we look forward to future collaboration with all our partners, including the FAO, who's been very much a partner in this work and who have their own tools on this, which we are also referring to in the forthcoming handbook, which will be out at the turn of the year. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gunilla. I really appreciate the chat. I think it's very hot in there. It means that we can't handle this in the time we have. So it means we actually right to think of a series where we can continue discussing this and making people aware of what opportunities there are to, make sure that the communities, vulnerable, climate change is coming in, and many other things that we need to deal with. And SSF, the small scale fisheries, could actually be resolved, the issues there, through social protection programs. We have in the room, and we are very lucky today, we have had Valerie in the beginning. We have had Mr. Roderick from Kenya also making remarks. And we are closing with Ifat Sharif, the Global Director, Social Protection Global Department at the World Bank. It's good to have you here actually in person. We are very happy. Valerie was not in person, but she was really spot on, answered some few questions in the chat as well. So please welcome and have your final closing remarks for us.
Thank you so much, Harrison, and thank you, Ko, and of course Sarah and Gunilla. You know, all this is a massive undertaking, but hugely important. And I was delighted to hear some of the presentations. But of course, I had the pleasure of co-chairing with Valerie the decision meeting of the report, and so I have some sort of understanding of why this work is important, and I'm delighted that we are now in this next milestone of actually sharing, and it's great to hear that you're also thinking more going forward. You know, whatever I heard and whatever I know, I mean, I think the reason why I'm delighted that we are doing this work is because the work that is happening in this piece is very much at the heart of how we in social protection want to think of our work, right? And I've heard all of that, and in just this kind of half an hour of conversation that I joined, and I would like to put this into this framework of 3 Ps. Right. So the first P that I think that is at the heart of how we work in social protection and increasingly want to work this way is looking at integrated policy. Right. My first P of trying to do exactly what you're doing, because in many ways, as many of you mentioned, what we offer on the table is this enabling instrument to address not just poverty and vulnerability, but other outcomes like food and nutrition security, like climate, right? This is clearly a climate issue that we need to be, an environment issue that we need to be thinking about. So I think this idea of making sure that we are thinking together in an integrated fashion is fundamental to the way we think. And in fact, the starting point often has been in poverty, but we see the value of actually starting it through even this other angle of, is this right for the environment? Is this right for the country? Is this right for the economy? You know, what are the labor market transitions that is going to happen? You know, people are going to get out of jobs temporarily or have to be reskill to put in another profession. We just heard about Viet Nam. So that's kind of my first P. The second P, and I picked up, and many of what we heard from colleagues and the case studies is this innovative programming, right? It's not just the policy, right? You really need to then think about how do you design our social registers and social protection so that there is scope for bringing in not just the fishermen, but there's so many other micro farmers to there's a whole set of vulnerable, non-poor population, right? But they could easily fall into poverty, whether because of a climate shock or there's a government policy of reducing number of fishing vessels, right? So I think this idea of how do you think about innovative programming is really where I think the heart of this work is, and we look forward to taking this to scale, right? And we've heard Ajit mention how we want to do more, better, bolder. This is, I think, in that sense, very much aligned with that. And the third P for me that I heard is the partnerships, right? And here I mean internal partnerships, of course, the partnership that's evolving and developing and deepening with us in SPJ and in environment, but also externally, right? So I see that we've of course have the supporters of the donors of the PROBLUE Trust Fund, but also institutions like IIED, and working closely with some of these partners in country and globally definitely is great, because again, we can't do all of this alone, and it has to be done through strong and, as I said, coordinated partnerships. So So in many ways, I think what you've brought together is excellent, and I hope that this will not just remain in conversation, that this really filters into the country programming and country engagement. And I think that's kind of how we ended with Valerie and myself at the decision meeting, that we want to sort of see how we can really think creatively together. And just listening to all of you, and I know that this is feasible, because from my own country, I come from Bangladesh, and I don't know if any of you have heard about this issue of hilsa fish, which was overfished for many years. It is a source of political tension with our neighboring country, India, because everyone wants this fish. It's a national delicacy, and it's only when the government introduced a seasonal ban on fishing at the time when the fish needs to spawn, and then couple that decision with income support and livelihood support, that we got success, right? So everything that I heard, it's doable. It's really how you bring the thinking across sectors together. So with that, again, thank you for taking this initiative. I hope that we can deepen the collaboration and the thinking, and I certainly will come back to you to see where and sort of hold you accountable to sort of see where this is gone, and what's the next horizon for innovation on all the 3 Ps that I laid out. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Ifa. This is really, really wonderful. I mean, I learned a lot from you, from the 3 Ps. I think it's really very easy to remember: policy, innovative programming, and partnerships. I think this is something we can take home very easily. Thank you very much for those comments. We have reached the end of our time, and therefore we have to stop the meeting. But I just want to appreciate all the speakers for the very good work that they have done. Thanking you also for the participants for the very wonderful questions that have been in the chat and going on. I mean, it's really very, very good to see people being very actively involved. There are so many questions that we need to clarify as we go on, issues of subsidies and many other things. So I think we are ripe for a series. So I will encourage you, Gunilla, and team to think about how we can continue these discussions. The handbook is very key for us to be able to engage the countries, and I think this is another area that we need to be moving in different regions. How people are aware about these governments are really looking for solutions, and I think we have the solutions coming up from this activity. So I will end the meeting there, and thank you once again for this very, very lovely and very entertaining, I would say, innovative, and also very good learning point for me. I mean, personally, I really appreciate the presenters for this, and we're looking forward for the next meeting. Thank you,
and well done. Straight on the dot, 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Very well chaired.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much again, everybody.
Thank you very much for coming. This has been really, really good. And I think the teamwork has just been wonderful.